are everywhere. More than once I have suspected Manuel, but... The door burst open again. It was like a thunderclap in that quiet sanctuary. Ramon stood with a hand laid flat on either doorpost, leaning in, his eyes screwed tip and glinting like the heart of flint. "They are gone," he said. "Allah, my son's gone." Ali leapt up and drew his knife, though none, not even he, knew why. "All gone," answered Ramon. "There was no fight, for there is no blood. I think they went of their own will." "By Allah, then they saw the prospect of a fight," swore Ali. He stood on feudal right that instant, claimed Ramsden's help, they two having plighted troth over a restored knife, and there is no pledge more inviolable. "Brother, I need thy strength," he said with dignity. And Ramsden did not hesitate. Believing that his wits are slow and that strength is all he has, he volunteers for all the odds and ends and heavy work, the others conceding the point to avoid discussion, but setting far too high a value on him to risk him unnecessarily. You may discuss a man's thews to his face, but not his spirit. So they trooped out behind Jeff, Jeremy leading, leaving only Grim alone in the room with Cyprian. It had occurred to Grim, as intuitions do come to a thoughtful man in a flash sometimes, that if the guard left in the street had gone so suddenly there was a chance that someone hoped to gain advantage by their absence. If so, then Cyprian was the obvious objective. If not, even so, it would do no harm for one of the party to stay and protect the old man. He offered no excuse, no explanation, simply stayed. Chapter 6. They fled before me. Having eased his mind concerning the requirements of another world, Fernandez de Mendoza de Souza Diomede Braganza began to speculate on the improbabilities of this one improbability of credit in the first place. None had been so foolish as to underwrite the fire risk on his hotel. It was a dead loss. It was equally improbable that any of his erstwhile guests would pay their bills. Since the books were burned, they would blame him for the loss of their effects, and probably bring suit against him. He knew equally well that the police would be in search of him that minute to arrest him on a charge of criminal responsibility. He knew his wisest course would be to go to the police and surrender himself because Father Cyprian, the next door to infallible, had said so, and, deciding to do that, he hurriedly reviewed another long list of improbabilities: acquaintances, who had been friends before the fire, who might be asked, but probably would not consent to furnish bail. So he turned to the left when the Padre's front door shut behind him, minded to call on one acquaintance on his way to the police. That circumstance prevented him from seeing the arrival of Grim, Ramsden, Jeremy, King and all the others, who approached Cyprian's from the opposite direction. They were within before Diomede turned and retraced his steps. So all he saw were Ali's sons in the dust under the tree, them and the constable opposite, who was rubbing at his jawbone with the end of a yellow truncheon to assist the processes of thought. What brought him back was nothing more concrete than one of those changes of mind, like the action of a ship in irons in a light wind. In India they call them disembodied spirits that govern men in their extremity. He had vacillated thought of another acquaintance, who might be less difficult to pin to than the first. Noticing the constable, he chose the other sidewalk, naturally. And with both eyes on the law's hired man from under the sheltering brim of his soft felt hat, he just as naturally stepped by accident on the skirts of the sheepskin coat of one of Ali's sons. The men of Sikandaram don't fancy being stepped on. It is even likely they would choose a goan's last if obliged to name the individual to be permitted some such liberty. Nevertheless, the act was obviously unintentional, and nothing more than a mild curse would have followed if Diomede had not, tripping and trying to recover, kicked the hilt of a yard-long northern knife. And that is sacrilege. A hillman would not kick his own knife. So the curse that leapt from the lips of one of Ali's sons was like the hissing and explosion when you plunge a hot iron into oil. Diomede sprang back as if a snake had bitten him, and even the constable across street awoke out of speculative meditation, for it looked as if the gods had come to life to solve his problem for him. It is good to be alert and on hand when the gods arrange the play. And as he sprang back, Diomede knew the face of his antagonist for one that had cursed him previously on the roof before the fight and the fire began. He recognized him as a man who had been held back by the others lest he use steel prematurely. And thought in the mind of a goans confronted by predicament is as swift and spiteful as an asp's. It recoils automatically on the person who aroused it. Now he could surrender to advantage. Now he need not go empty-handed to the mills of the police that grind so small, and so impartially, so be that they get their grist. This came of confessing his sins to Father Cyprian. Now bail was unimportant. There were dozens who would hurry to his aid if it were known he had scapegoats, locked up in the next cell, ready to be sacrificed. All of that passed through his mind with the speed of starlight, in between the opening and closing of the hillman's angry teeth. He beckoned the constable, who came, standing warily a good yard from the sidewalk, not enamored of the chances yet, for they were 6-1 and the gods not finished shuffling. It is the privilege of the gods to make things easy for a man. Arrest all these, commanded Diomede, in English for the sake of extra emphasis. They are the villains who set fire to my hotel. I warn you they are dangerous. Arrest them instantly. The constable could recognize the danger without help. He was perfectly aware of 6 long knives not yet free of their scabbards but poised between earth and air like Muhammad's coffin. Moreover, the fire was news to him. Brothers, I said that constable designed an inconvenience to us. Stand back, chew back. The brothers stood so, around the tree trunk, inoffensive as a third rail. In case you refuse to arrest them I will report you. This is a highly important case very, said Diomede, pulling out a pencil to write down the constable's number. I saw these men set fire to my hotel, he added. But the constable, preferring life to an eulogium in the Gazette, demurred. Where are your witnesses? He countered, grinning. Diomede flew into a rage immediately. He knew the law, or said he did, and threatened to invoke the whole of it, including dark and lawless influence, on the constable's unrighteous head. He named names. He cited instances. He mentioned the policeman's ancestry. Raising his voice indignantly, he summoned all the neighborhood to witness cowardice, corruption of policemen in receipt of bribes, refusing to arrest 6 murderers. The neighborhood had no will to associate itself with outside scandal, having plenty of its own, and the few who had been in the street departed all but one. A man in an orange-yellow smock with a big, red cast mark in the middle of his forehead, a twisted orange-yellow turban, and no other visible garment, property or distinction, stood where another great tree marked a narrow cross street and beckoned, holding his forefinger close up to his eye as if in some way that lent long range to the invitation. And the constable by now was more enraged than Diomede, with this addition, that his rage was based on absolute injustice, for the things that Diomede had said of his female relatives were not to be borne by a man of spirit and some authority. They had reached the stage of snapping fingers, and Diomede's 2 arms were waving like semaphores as he leaned forward, showing simian teeth, to spit denunciation in the constable's indignant face. One beckons, said a voice beside the tree. And you are corrupt, everybody knows it, son of an evil mother, you accept bribes from all and sundry, and he wears a yellow garment, brothers, such as the Sodus asterisk wear, but yellower. He is only one. We could beat him if he lied to us. He beckons, and he signals silence, asterisk wandering holy men. All together run, then. They were gone like leopards flushed from cover, down street, each with a hand on the hilt of a Khyber knife, as good to stand in way of as the torrents of Sikandarum in spate. They swooped on the man in yellow as if he were foe, not friend, meaning to seize him and whirl him along between them, but he knew thee. The next paragraph was partially unreadable in the book. He had evoked, and he stepped down, had vanished when they reached the, lasted half a minute casting this and, of hounds before one of them saw, and the 6 went full pelt at a course, hardly thinking now, but in 3 purposes, to outrun the con, to overtake the man in yellow, to keep together. There, exclaimed Diomede, pausing in a torrent of abuse. Now all the world can see how you let criminals escape. And the abuse had got its work in. There is poison in the stuff, that breeds miscalculation. It is like a smoke screen thrown off by a human skunk to mortify whoever has weak sensibilities. The constable was angry and aware of duty to be done, someone to be arrested. 6 criminals, accused of arson, had escaped under cover of the 7 Savalis of abuse, and so the 7th must be guiltier than all. He raised his truncheon actually to hammer out a signal on the sidewalk, but, in Diomede's excited imagination, to attack. And Diomede struck him twice, in the face, with the flat of his hand, hysterically struck an officer of the law in execution of his duty. So the truncheon went to work in earnest, and poor Diomede was beaten over collarbone and forearm until he wouldn't have dared move them for the agony. Then he was handcuffed ignominiously, swearing, beseeching, praying, and marched away, followed by inevitable small boys as free from the vials of compassion as the monkeys are that some say are their ancestors. They said things that excited Diomede to wilder imprecations yet. And among the boys there was a dwarf, a man in orange-yellow, taller by half a head than the tallest youngster, and as stocky as 2 of them, but gifted with the same free movement, so that he passed in the crowd unnoticed. He edged his way closer and closer to the constable, who glanced about him nervously, aware that in these higher education days the riots and the rescuing are done by schoolboys while their elders do the propaganding in the rear. He hurried, driving his prisoner in front of him with thumps from the truncheon on the backbone just above the trousers band. It was several minutes before the dwarf could edge close enough to speak low and yet be heard. You are fortunate, he said at last. Surely you have promotion in your grasp. You have taken the infamous Braganza, who is charged with burning his hotel and murdering 100 guests. I knew it. Come and give your evidence. The constable retorted, for the East lies glibly or not at all. He tried to seize the dwarf as a material witness, but missed him in the crowd, and had to hurry on for fear of losing Diomed, whom he charged presently with arson and with employing 6 Aphrodis to preserve him from arrest. I fought them all, and they fled before me, he asserted. Meanwhile, there was a strange assortment of individuals in more or less pursuit of Ali's sons, with Ali in the lead, of course, since the sons were his valuable property, and with Chulander goes as naturally in the rear, as utterly indifferent to the son's fate as the noon is to the netting of fish at ebb tide, but on the job and anxious notwithstanding. For if an earthquake had emptied Bedlam, releasing affinities of swine of Gadarenes, and if government officials plus editors of daily press were in charge of whole proceedings, that would be diamond-edged sanity compared to this. This is worse than acting on advice of experts. This is my aunt. He was not far wide of the mark, for as he waddled, wiping sweat from his fat face, he could see the whole long-drawn line extending down street, each in his own way calling curious attention. Jeremy, for instance, reveling in being taken for an Arab, looking ready to go mad and do a whirling dervish dance at the first excuse, with the long, loose sleeves of his black coat spread like wings, in full flight after Ali. Then Ramsden angrily, annoyed with Jeremy for making such a public exhibition of himself yet unable to overtake him and remonstrate, striding along like Samson who slew the Philistines. King next, side by side with Narayan Singh, neither of them even fractionally off-key, and therefore about as noticeable as 2 true notes in a flat and sharp piano scale. Man that is born of a woman is like ginger pop, remarked Chulander goes, pausing to consider. Cut string cork flies and he spills himself. Step 1 on the path of wisdom is to be wise, ergo by the waters of this Babylon I sit me down and weep thus tree, I greet you, weeping sweat not tears. Great tree, what a world of men and women you have mocked. Mock me a while, your shade is comforting and your shafts of wit pass overhead. Now let us see King Sahib is remarkable for sanity. Ergo, he will notice me in rear. Observing emulation of Fabius Cunctator by this Babu, King Sahib will suppress inborn proclivities of Anglo-Saxon and pattern his thought accordingly. He will follow down that street to next corner, where he will park himself brittlely, sending Narayan Singh forward to repeat process. Thus, whenever I proceed as far as corner and become conspicuous, King Sahib will observe me and will signal to Narayan Singh. We shall thus be in touch. And the others will behave as the sparks that fly upward, which can't be helped. That is my guess. Being heirs of all the ages, I shall sit in shade and see the world go by. Suspicious. Very. Chulander goes was right. King did turn the corner in pursuit, and at the next one did sit down on the veranda of a boarding house for Sikhs, where Narayan Singh, who kept up the pursuit along another street, could find him and whence he himself might see Chulander goes if the Babu should see fit to come to the corner and signal. The others, following Ali of Sikandaram, who shouted inquiries 100 yards ahead, stuck to the pursuit like people in a motion picture comedy. Item 1, a fool is very foolish, said Chulander goes to himself, leaning his fat back against the tree and flapping flies with an enormous handkerchief. Therefore congenital deficiencies of Ali's sons comply with formula. Verb, sap. If they had been attacked, said idiots would have stood at bay by door of Padre's house, in accordance with law that nature abhors a vacuum doubtless. Empty heads apply, at spigot of authority to be filled with instructions. They would have focused attention on Padre's house inevitably. Quod erat nict war, ergo, they were not attacked. What then? A woman. Much too early in the morning. And again no fight. If 6 such idiots pursued a woman, or women, through the streets of Delhi, there would be bad blood spilt as certainly as there are speeches when a politician pursues office. Therefore not a woman. This time not the sex that bringeth forth and sorrow and regret same. Then a man. The unproductive sex, at least is sorrowful but less opaque. Motives more easily discernible. The 6 translucent jewels of Sikandaram have been decoyed and by a man, or men therefore for profit. Whose? Why, I lift a stone. Why do I lift a stone? Because I need the space it sits on, or I wish to throw it, or if they needed the space on which the sons of Ali sat, or the street in which they sat. I see, I get you, Steve, I get you. As Jim Grim says, behold, I see through mystery. Let us hope actions are not so loud as words. Thou tree, thou solid, dumb, obtruding tree, farewell. There came a Tikagari * drawn by one horse on the way home from assisting at the Rishis *** only knew what all-night revelry. Chulander goes signaled the driver, who declined a fare sleepily, without success. The Babu waddled to mid-street and had climbed in before the protesting Jehu could wallop his nag to a trot. Asterisk hired cab. Asterisk spirits. Give her gas, said Chulinder Ghost, translating slang learned from Grimm into opprobrious vernacular. So the weary cabman whacked the wearier horse and, better to call attention to himself, the Babu stood up screaming that he had a gallstone and would die unless in hospital within the minute. He was seen, heard, contemplated. But he only drove 2 blocks, around a corner, and then paid the astonished cabman the exact fare. If he had overpaid him he would only have multiplied suspicion. Then he walked back 3 blocks, parallel to the street in which was Cyprian's house, and turning the corner suddenly was just in time to see 3 men in orange-yellow smocks approach Cyprian's door and ring the bell. He stood there long enough to watch them enter and see the door shut again behind them. "Callie," he exclaimed then, "let us hope Jim Grimm is appreciative. Dogs of the wife of Shiva the Destroyer. Oh, my aunt." He had been in time to see Ali of Sikandaram charge up the steps and plunge into the building for the men he hurled his questions at had misdirected Ali, and he had covered an unnecessary mile before learning that his precious sons were foul of the law. He ran like an articulated jellyfish until he reached a corner whence he could see King perched on the boarding house veranda. There, ignoring all discretion, he pulled his rose-pink turban off and threw the 30 yards of silk in air, whirling it until King raised a hand in answer. Promptly King leaned out over the veranda rail at the corner of 2 streets and made a gesture that Narayan Singh saw from a quarter of a mile away. And the Sikh, not optimistic, having seen too much but understanding that the gang was wanted back at Cyprian's, went at the double to retrieve as many of the gang as possible from a building in front of which 2 square lamps advertised police. Narayan Singh had seen Raman follow Ali, and then Jeremy, then Ramsden. None had come back down the steps, so he was in no doubt what to do, although he did not know yet how absurdly simple the strategy of the man in orange-yellow had been, nor how simpler and more finished would be that of Jeremy. Like Will-o'-the-Wisp in orange livery, he had simply yelled those 6 North Country swashbucklers a dance along street after street up the stairs of the police station, and there had accused the lot of them of theft. There was nothing whatever for the police to do but hold them. When Ali got there, pandemonium was loose, for the 6 sons' weapons had been taken and they were resisting further search as desperately as hell's imps would object to baptism, teeth, talons, imprecation horizontal mostly, with a couple of policemen laboring at each limb and each lot expanding and contracting suddenly in spasms. One policeman, he who had recently arrested Dione Thagones, went from lot to lot using a truncheon unapplauded, aiming at the heads of Afghans but oftener hitting his friends. He said nothing about recognizing them, having already claimed to have defeated them in mortal combat. The obvious solution was to stun them lest they recognize himself, but it was extremely difficult to hit their heads. And into that confusion Ali leapt like a firecracker, knife and all, to be brought to a stand by the officer's revolver. The officer was in his place, in charge, behind the desk. There might have been murder done. Ali was in no mood for compliance, with his darlings being whacked and twisted under his eyes. The fact that the police were bleeding, and his sons not more than warming up for a morning's work, added to his zeal, and instinct warned him that the man in yellow was the father of the rumpus. Therefore, Ali was for springing at the man in yellow's throat when Jeremy strode in, smiling like an illustration from the Book of Ruth, with Raman yelping like a wolf a step behind him. "Salam alaikum. Peace. Let there be peace," boomed Jeremy in a voice with a ventriloquial note that fills a room. He sounded, as he looked, like a man from the Old Testament. Ali detected magic in the wind and yelled a word that his sons obeyed on the instant. Even so, the police were human and eager for revenge, but Ramsden walked in. Baring his forearms, he offered to kill with his hands the first 3 constables who struck a prisoner. So there was peace as Jeremy requested, and the man in yellow took advantage of it, going close to 2 of Ali's sons, who were held fast, with a policeman on each wrist. He said he wanted to identify them. Jeremy observed, and Ramsden observed Jeremy. The officer observed all 3, but Jeremy's hand is swifter than any eye. "They are the men who stole from me," said the man in yellow. "I had a gold coin similar to this one in each hand. Rushing at me, they seized my wrists and took the money, which you will find on their persons. Search them." He drew from a pocket in his smock and displayed one ancient coin that Jeremy and Ramsden identified as having belonged to the Portuguese Da Gama. "Search them," ordered the officer, tapping his revolver on the desk. "Wait. First let me also identify," said Jeremy, and he, too, went close to the same 2 of Ali's sons. He removed and palmed a coin that the man in yellow had secreted in the nearest man's sash. Not satisfied with that, he walked tip to the police officer and whispered to him. Then, from him, to the man in orange-yellow who was beginning to look less pleased and mite impatient. Have I ever seen you anywhere? Asked Jeremy. Were you ever in Jerusalem? Jaffa, Alexandria? No. He lies, said Jeremy. I know him well. This was a trick by the Hindu to steal a gold watch from your honor, he went on, smiling at the officer as if butter hardly ever melted in his mouth. However, as the prophet saith, on whom be peace, let not words and emptiness of speech suffice. Search all three men. Now Ali's sons stood still, submitting, for they had felt what Jeremy's nimble fingers did. And Jeremy, with his back to Ramsden, passed to him 2 gold coins for safety's sake, stepping forward again instantly. The jaw of the man in orange-yellow dropped. He that Arab, he began. But the searchers had stripped Ali's sons in vain, and it was his turn. The first hand thrust into his pocket drew out the officer's gold watch and chain. Magic! Exclaimed the officer. He never once came near me. Lock him up then. Such as he are dangerous, said Jeremy, not turning a hair, and the officer accepted the advice, insisting, too, however, on holding 3 of Ali's sons as witnesses. It was then, as the door of one cell slammed on all 4 and a 5th already in there, that Narayan Singh strode in, appraised the situation, and strode out again, leaving as many to follow him as could or would. Chapter 7. Shakespearean Homeopathic Remedy. Grim and Cyprian sat face to face in silence with a shaft of sunlight streaming through the space between them. Infinitely tiny specks of dust for Cyprian was a martinet, and Manuel used cloth and broom incessantly danced tarantella fashion, more or less as gnats do, in the golden fairway. You observe them, said Cyprian presently. Each one of those moving specks is itself made of billions of infinitely tiny specks all in motion. That is the way the universe is made. All atoms all in motion in an all-pervading essence known as ether. You know that. It is in the books, the oldest of all books as well as the newest. The ancients knew about it 7,000 years ago, if we accept their heretical chronology. I have their books to prove it. These 9 unknown are the inheritors of scientific secrets that used to form the basis of the ancient mysteries. Yes, that's so. That's so. There isn't any doubt of it. Not religious secrets, understand me, no, they are enemies of all religion. They use scientific truths to stir superstition by pretending their phenomena are miracles. Devil's work. They know the rascals. They have knowledge. Compared to them, our modern scientists are just as Julius Caesar would have been if somebody confronted him with Payne's fireworks or an 18-inch gun or the radio. Clever fellow, CSAR. Bright as a button. He would have tried to explain it away, but there would be the phenomena effect result of cause. You have to know the cause to understand effect. No use repudiating it. Our moderns fail exactly as Julius Caesar would have done. And the 9 unknown laugh. Devils. Nothing suits them better than to have the scientists, the newspapers, the governments, the Secret Service, the police, all vow that no such knowledge as theirs exists, no such organization. Above all, they chuckle because the church denies them. Missionaries are their best friends. To declare they are non-existent without proving it leaves the rascals free to do as they please, without lessening the superstition of the crowd. You understand. Grimm did not. He has the pragmatist adventurer's view of life, dissatisfied with all veils hung between himself and Numenon, and studying each phenomenon from the angle of what's the use of it. Why deny what you can't prove? Why not discover their science and employ it properly? Cyprian interrupted him with a frown and a flash of temper that betrayed volcanic will, unweakened by his age and only curbed by discipline. Teach shut. Wiser minds than yours decided about that long ago. Beware of the sin of presumption. These people have been branded as magicians, tricksters. Their pretensions, magic tricks. Humbugs. Evil workers. Liars. Cheats. They have imposed on superstition. Take the consequences. Banned by the church. Outlawed. Burn their books. Who shall say then that they have, or ever had, a scrap of scientific knowledge? That is my task, 52 and 50 years of effort. Burn the books. The 9 books. Burn them. They have defied the church, sed Prevalabit. I don't get you, answered Grimm. Knowledge ought to be known. Those books are mine. To do as I see fit. Did you not agree? Demanded Cyprian. Grimm had agreed, but that did not admit the whole contention. Grimm, because he keeps an open mind, has been accused by missionaries of belonging to nearly every heathen cult in turn, but his name stands written on no muster roll. He is under no vows of obedience. He countered. King and I have talked this over lots. King has been on the trail of it for 20 years, you know. Are you sure the 9 aren't honorable men, who know more than is safe to teach the public? Cyprian smiled at that like a martyr prepared to die for his convictions. Only, someone killed the Portuguese, Grimm went on. Why, if they know so much, why kill a drunken crook you can afford to pity? I have told you, they are devils, answered Cyprian. And while the hotel burned there was a voice urging the crowd to attack us, Grimm continued. The same voice shouted, fire! Deliberated, creating panic. Someone had searched the Don's room, carried his books away. Same men more likely returned to burn their tracks. That hardly seems like men who, as you put it, have inherited the knowledge of the ancient mysteries. The expression of Cyprian's face changed. He drew on his mask of patience that at 80 a man has learned to use consummately or not at all. It was quite clear that if he gave discussion rein these colts of other creeds would gallop away with him, Grimm particularly. Discipline was out of the question. Whip he had none. Argument was useless. It would do no good to tell a man like Grimm to let speculation alone. Would you go and find my servant Manuel? He asked, for helplessness is like a weapon in a wise man's hand. Grimm left the room. Manuel sat cross-legged on a blanket in the corner of the pantry, hardly having moved from the spot where Ramsden dumped him down. The sin of speculation, if it is a sin, could not be laid to him, for he was dumb, determined, obstinate, like a clog that has hidden to escape a thrashing and will neither run away nor come to heel. He did not even shake his head when Grimm ordered him into the Padre's presence, so Grimm went back and reported the state of affairs, having more than one purpose in mind. And it seemed good to Cyprian just then to supply Grimm with the wherewithal to take his mind off the subject they had been discussing. Helplessness was put to work again. I am old. It tires me to undertake these. Do you think Mr. Ramsden frightened him too much? I wonder, would you mind, eh? See what you can do with him. Persuade him to come in here. Yes. Such a rascal as he has been. No, by no means always honest, but a servant he has been a comfort. Will you talk to him? That was tantamount to carte blanche. Grimm, incapable of nosing into the domestic secrets of his host, would and did crowd every limit to the edge when given leave. He squatted down, cross-legged too, in front of Manuel and waited until the shifty brown eyes had to come to a rest at last and meet his gray ones. The passport says they are gray, which makes it legal, but no two agree as to their real color. Possibly they change, although his zeal is fixed. You're in luck. You've one chance, Grimm said, speaking in Punjabi. Manuel did not answer, but the word luck probed the very heart of inborn passion. Da Gama and Braganza had no luck at all, said Grimm, and Manuel lowered his eyes, not straight downward but along the arc of an ellipse because of certain racial peculiarities. Da Gama died. Braganza's house was burned. Do you feel brave? Grimm asked him. Manuel looked up suddenly. Who are you? He asked. His lips parted loosely. The corners of his mouth dropped, and he shifted his eyes to left and right, showing more than was wholesome of the bloodshot whites. Dread, unexpected and acute, was unmistakable. It acted like a solvent on the sullenness of fear. Grimm saw his chance almost too long to be called chance. He had nothing to go on but conjecture. Who do you think I am? He retorted. Look into my eyes. Who am I? Manuel hesitated, with the expression of self-conscious innocence facing a firing squad. Having double-crossed friend and enemy alike, there was nothing to fall back on but his conscience, obviously. Grimm bored and, wishing he knew something definite to base assault on. Didn't you expect me? He demanded. Yes, but... The 1,000,000-to-1 shot landed. Grimm's face hardly changed expression, but his eyes had laughter in them that the Goans was far too scared to recognize. But I didn't look for a Punjabi. He who told me wore a yellow smock sadhu. I have not had time. Time, Grimm retorted, forcing the note of indignation. I have not had time, and I have not been paid, said Manuel, shifting his eyes again, and then himself, so that Grimm, who was all alert suspicion, jumped to a conclusion. Do you know they killed Da Gama? He asked, setting his face like brass, and Manuel shuddered. Do you mean to tell me you have not been paid? He went on, fixing his eyes on the Goans and speaking slowly. And whether or not Manuel had pocketed his price, imagination warned him he was helpless, at the mercy of someone who would harvest whether he had sown or not. Admission that he had been paid was no proof of it at all, he being what he was. But now he knows I was at the keyhole. He will dismiss me, and first he will investigate. So he will find out, and I do not dare. I will give the money back. That, too, was no proof that he had been paid. But it was proof that he had taken more than one step on the path of treason. Grimm turned and